Hi everyone, I'm here today to try and answer a pressing question for you, because I know all your life you have been wondering what is ink chromatography, and you had no way of finding out. Because that's the situation I was in a couple of days ago. I was like, oh my gosh, this stuff is so cool. How does it work? Why does it work? What is it? So, I'm going to try to give you this in my own words because it needs to be explained in a simple way. And my understanding of it is not complex. I am not a chemist like my father was, but I was around a lot of chemists, so I understand a little bit of things, but not much. So ink chromatography is the study of how inks dissolve in into solution. And usually with fountain pen inks, the solution that we use to dissolve them is water. So we use water because fountain pen inks are inherently water soluble. So when we do ink chromatography of a fountain pen ink, what we can learn from that, based on how far the ink travels when it's exposed to the water, you will see what I'm talking about in a minute, and based on how many colors you see in the chromatography, you can learn some things about the ink. Whether or not it is indelible, which means it looks exactly the same whether you put it in the water or not. Now, whether or not it's permanent. Some people would say permanent is a synonym for indelible, but there are people like Nathan Tardif who would disagree with you. Nathan would say probably that you can have a permanent ink that changes color in water, but as long as some of it is there forever and it's readable, that's the important part. So there's a difference, I think, in that aspect between indelible and permanent. Indelible is something that water will not affect at all. So we're going to look at three different kinds of ink. We're going to look at a ink which is specifically designed to be used in dip pens, an India ink. We are going to look at a pigmented ink, and we are going to look at Noodler's Heart of Darkness, which calls itself a permanent ink. And I believe that's a little different than the Diatramentis document ink, which is the pigmented ink we're looking at. So we're going to look at those three inks, and we're going to address a definition of permanence when we're done with that. Okay. So I did have a small change of plans after I did my intro. I wanted you to see what a water-soluble ink would look like during the chromatography process. So I used Waterman Black so that you would have a basis for comparison. So there you have it. That's the Waterman Black. Sorry about the purple at the top. That was from me holding that. That was from where I tried to start writing on that with a pen. Big mistake there. It didn't work. So we see that the parts of the ink that travel the furthest are like almost yellow, and the parts of it that travel the least far are blue. So it's kind of, this black is composed of blue and yellow, which is very interesting to me. I mean, I could have kind of expected that it would be some form of nearly complementary color if you're going to make a dark ink like that. So it's not like a complete surprise, but I think it was really cool. Now this is Noodler's Heart of Darkness. This is what we were talking about earlier, about this being like a permanent ink here. So I'm going to put this like over here, and then I'm going to dip this guy into there. Got a little bit on that nib. Now let's draw a line across here. Whoops, it all kind of came out at once. Well, that's okay. And this is what Nathan Tardif describes as a permanent ink. Okay. I think we got some in there anyway. So this is, my guess is that some of this will travel, because although this is considered to be a permanent ink, it is not, it's called bulletproof, is another word that Nathan Tardif uses to describe the ink, which means that if you dump water on it, there will be some part of it that's left over that will be readable. But the rest, there are some elements of this ink that are not waterproof. And, you know, that's kind of his area of expertise as an ink maker, I think, or one of them anyway, is that he likes to deal with inks that have different characteristics like this, which it looks like it is in fact kind of migrating up the paper, but it's not. You can still see the original line. So much less of that is traveling, and there's a much, I wish I could angle it a little bit, but it's hard. Okay, there you go. You can see it, I think, better now. Much less of that is traveling, but it's, and I'll zoom in on it some for you here. Okay. Much less of that is traveling up the thing, and there's quite a bit of it remaining behind in the line I drew with the dip pen, which should help you to see that this is in fact like a permanent ink. But there is a bit of that pigment that's also mobile. I find this to be really interesting because I think like that big glob I put down in the first part of the thing, it appears to have washed out more. So I guess what we can say after looking at this is that this is like the line that I drew would still be readable. And then the rest of the stuff that continuously is traveling upward is the stuff that, like, if you dumped water on a page where it was written, where you wrote on it with the Noodler's Heart of Darkness, it would definitely smear, like, but you would still be able to read the original writing. So that's what the bulletproof, or like Nathan Tardif's definition of permanent, is that if it is exposed to water, it will still be readable. Which there's nothing wrong with that definition, because, you know, his idea is that you use ink to create documents, and if you want your document to be readable. So here we go. This is that next. That's the Noodler's Heart of Darkness. So you notice we can still see the lines, whereas with the Waterman, you can't see really any line that I actually made with the pen. You can just see kind of, okay. So these, it's interesting to me, these are all black inks, and the pigments in the Waterman ink were actually colored. Now this ink is something called diatramentis black, and diatramentis black is kind of like a Sharpie in a bottle. Diatramentis black should not travel at all. It is considered to be fountain pen safe. So according to this should look exactly the same after I put it in water. But I'm going to just do that for just a second to let it set. And if it doesn't look exactly the same, then they're lying, and it's not a Sharpie in a bottle. And what do you know? That line is not moving, not one bit. I think that that other stuff was still wet, like the stuff on the left, the blob that I created was still wet. So you can ignore that and look at the rest of the thing. So the water is now well above the line, and the line has not changed at all in its consistency. And that is what I would call permanent. Please ignore this spot, like pretend it's not there, because the spot was still wet. The ink was still wet because I put down too much ink to really do the test. And even though I waved that around, it didn't really dry sufficiently. Like every ink, the ink itself will move, you know, when it's in contact with the water if it's wet. But if it's, once it's dry, it should look like that. Like that would be like if you wrote on a piece of paper and then you put that paper out in a rainstorm and you came back in 20 minutes, that paper should not change. It should be wet, but it shouldn't look any different. So that is diatramentis black. This is a very permanent ink. And diatramenous inks, the black one, anyway, the document inks are all considered to be pigmented inks. So rather than a dye, this actually contains a pigment. So probably like with black, it would involve some form of carbon. All right, so here we go. You can see, if you look at the Heart of Darkness closely and you look at the diatramenous, you can see where even above the line on the Heart of Darkness, I did the same thing there. I kind of put too much of a blob on the one edge, but in the middle where I made the line, you can still see that part of the pigment is traveling upwards. But in the diatramenous, you can see that no pigment traveled upwards. So that is like what I would consider to be an indelible ink rather than a permanent ink, which is Nathan Tardif's. Nathan Tardif's would still be readable, and it's probably safer for fountain pens than the diatramenous. I mean, I've used it in fountain pens and I've never had a problem getting it out of a fountain pen. I would be much more nervous to use the diatramenous, but I'm going to use it very soon with a cheap fountain pen because I really want to see what that's all about. So, all right, next. This is India ink. So this is drawing ink. Now this stuff should never ever go in a fountain pen like this, because the way that the diatramenous ink gets away with having pigment in it is that it, the pigments are ground very finely, so that, and they put like a lubricant in with it so they can go through the fountain pen without sticking in the fountain pen. Now this, the pigments probably aren't as fine and they didn't put a lubricant in with it and stuff. So that's fine, you know, because it's not for fountain pens. It's not intended for that. So, okay. All right, this is India ink. So, if this is permanent, we should still see those two lines separated, right? Let's see how permanent our India ink is. Some of the lines are migrating. That's interesting. So there are elements in this India ink that are less. India ink would be more likely to smear, it looks like, than the diatramenous. I find that really interesting. But if it's a pure carbon ink, I mean, let's give it another minute here. And there again, please ignore the dots where the heavier areas are, because I did not give those areas a chance to dry sufficiently to bond with the paper. Okay, so this is permanent. I mean, definitely seems permanent. But I do see a little smooching in the lines. Like, it's not quite, I think the diatramenous, you know, but it's right up there with the diatramenous in its permanence. I think probably the difference in composition between the India ink and the diatramenous ink, and the reason you can use that in fountain pens, is they put a lubricant in the diatramenous ink to help it go through the pen, and they and they don't do that with the India ink, and that's why the India ink is only usable in dip pens and pens like the bamboo pen that I used here. Anyway, I really hope this was useful. I hope it gave you a little bit of an understanding of chromatography and of what different categories of ink mean when they say water soluble. So there again, the Waterman black on the left is water soluble black. The Noodler's Heart of Darkness is bulletproof or permanent black, which means that you should still be able to see the line in there, which you can. And the diatramenous is, it's considered to be archival or indelible, and ignoring the spot that I put there, you can still see the line very, very well. It's very, very crisp, and there's no ink movement in there. And then the India ink is also considered to be permanent and indelible, and I do see that there are some smooches in the India ink. But I think it probably is almost as permanent as the diatramenous. I think maybe I should have just waved that paper around for a second or two longer. Anyway, I hope this was useful. I hope you enjoyed the little experiment. And if you have any questions about ink chromatography that you feel like I could answer, or about using a permanent ink in a fountain pen and how to do that, I will be happy to go over that in the comments below. Have a nice day, guys.